Okay, well, I think we've got a good enough amount. So let me start again by saying, for those just joining, my name is Nick Perry, past president of the Mountain View Historical Association, here to offer tech support as you are all logging in. Feel free to chat us or email if you have issues. Email again is info@mountainviewhistorical.org. And with that, as folks continue to join us, I'm going to turn it over to the Mountain View Historical Association President, Pamela Baird.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first meeting of 2021. This is our Zoom, the third Zoom meeting that we've had. So we're like everybody else still trying to figure this out. The Mountain View Historical Association is a volunteer-run, nonprofit organization that is dedicated to researching, sharing, and preserving the history of Mountain View, California. I'd like to welcome you again. Happy Valentine's Day and happy Lunar New Year, Chinese New Year. So we appreciate you spending part of a busy weekend. It's also President's Day on Monday. So in any case, so what we're going to do today is we're going to have two slideshow presentations. The first one will be presented by David Laws, and then the second one will be jointly presented by Brooke Ray Smith and Nikki Lowy. So in any case, okay, we're already getting some chat. That's great. Okay, so then we will have questions and answers afterwards, and you can use the chat function. We have everyone disabled in terms of their voicing, so the only way we have it set up right now is for you to use the chat function. And then first, we will actually hear from Robert Cox, who's Vice President. He has a public service announcement, and then we will start our presentation after that with an introduction of our first panelist, David Laws.
Robert, you're muted.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Robert.
Okay, good. Yeah, this is just a short public service announcement from the Santa Clara County Supervisor Office. The supervisor has asked us to reach out to all organizations in Mountain View and give a short COVID update for people who are attending events. And I'm going to do that with one slide, which is right here, about what you need to know and do. I mean, the first thing is make sure that you understand that we still need to wear masks and practice social distancing more than 6 feet away. And you even need to do that after you get the vaccine, because what the vaccine does for you is it keeps you from getting a life-threatening case of COVID. It doesn't mean you won't get COVID, and it certainly doesn't mean that you can't pass it on to other people. And so please continue the practicing of the social distancing and the wearing of masks. Santa Clara County residents eligible for vaccines now include healthcare workers, long-term care residents, and people who are over 65. Because there was one significant provider, which was Kaiser, that was not, didn't have enough vaccine for all the people. Last week, Santa Clara County announced a no wrong door policy, and anyone over 65 can get a vaccine if they contact their healthcare provider, the Mountain View Community Center on Rengsdorf, or a Levi's Stadium by making an appointment. Walk-in sites are being opened now in East San Jose and Gilroy, and will spread through the county, but right now you need to have an appointment. The goal is to get 70 to 80% of the population vaccinated by August of 2021, which is an effective herd immunity. In any case, you can learn more about getting vaccinations and sign up for one through your healthcare provider or somewhere else by going to sccfreevax.org, which has all the latest updates at all times on what's going on with COVID vaccinations. If you need to get a test, you can go to sccfreetest.org. And if for whatever reason you can't remember those websites, always you can call 211. and just tell people what it is you need, and they will route you over to someone you can talk to. But it does take longer if you do that because 211 handles a lot of different services, not just COVID. So anyway, that's all. And now I'll get out of your way and let the meeting begin.
Okay, thank you, Robert, for that essential information. And stay safe, everyone. Next, we'll start our first presentation. David Laws is our presenter, and I'll give you a little bit of information about him. Based on his 50-year career in marketing and general management roles in Silicon Valley high-tech companies, David Laws tells stories of the pioneering days of the computer chip business. He serves as a semiconductor curator for the Computer History Museum. His work has appeared in numerous broadcast, electronic, and print media outlets with the BBC and NPR. He also has a mobile apps, guidebooks, newspapers, magazines, and academic journals has featured his work. So I'd like to introduce David Laws, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Pamela. Okay, I hope we're live. Can everybody see my screen? I see Pamela's thumb, so I assume that's good. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. Looking forward to telling you a little bit about the early days, and I guess in many people's view, the good old days of Silicon Valley. As semiconductor curator at the Computer History Museum, I'm privileged to meet a lot of interesting characters that I've interviewed over the years and gather a lot of information on the early days of Silicon Valley that we'll share with you over the next 20 minutes or so. So where is Silicon Valley? To a lot of people, unfortunately, it means San Francisco. But the heart of Silicon Valley began right here in Mountain View back in, nominally, the first use of the word Silicon Valley was 50 years ago this year, but the portents of Silicon Valley had been set many, many years ago in Stanford. We will look at it in a minute. Quick backup. Why is it called Silicon Valley? Again, I don't think I need to introduce that to many folks who are watching here today, but of course, silicon is the fundamental material used in the manufacture of semiconductors and computer chips. It's also the second most abundant element on Earth. 28% of the molecules hanging around, probably in the beach on the surface of the Earth. And when that is treated at very high temperatures, sliced up and chemically etched, it creates the modern semiconductor, computer chip, microelectronic circuit, has many, many names, that is the basis of modern Silicon Valley today. The portents for Silicon Valley were actually set probably more than 100 years ago with a budding radio industry that grew up around Stanford and many other places on the peninsula, especially associated with ship to shore and then later aerial communications. And these activities had two key elements. One, development of new technologies and combined with a strong entrepreneurial bent in the people who developed a succession of very successful companies which have uniquely kept this area at the forefront in many areas of technology. About once every decade, in fact, a basic new kind of business came along, from communications in the 30s, defense systems, magnetic storage in the 50s. The one we're going to look at in most intense detail today is the decade of semiconductors, of which Fairchild is probably the leading technology company at the time. And the semiconductors that came out of Fairchild enabled another succession of decades: personal computing networks, internet, mobile apps, and when I look back over the last decade, probably artificial intelligence enabled by very specialized semiconductor devices has been the dominant driver of new ideas and new directions. The silicon part of the valley appeared around 1956, 57, where William Shockley, one of the three inventors of the transistor at Bell Labs back in 1948, decided he wanted to set out on his own, set up his own company, and looked a bunch of places and eventually arranged funding with Beckman Instruments down in Southern California. They were based in Fullerton. Beckman was very, very hopeful that Shockley would set up his business down in Fullerton. But I understand there's two drives as to why Shockley came up here. One is encouragement from Terman at Stanford, provost at Stanford at the time. And then perhaps some people say more influential was the fact that Shockley's mother lived in Palo Alto. So might have been a different world if she hadn't. The photograph on the right here is Shockley celebrating his Nobel Prize as one of the inventors of the transistor back in 1957. And gathered around him are a bunch of very bright young people he recruited from across the country, including two names that are very familiar. Gordon Moore in the lower left hand corner. Gordon said this is the first time he'd had champagne for breakfast. And at the back is Bob Noyce holding the champagne glass. On the right-hand side are a number of other people that basically worked for Shockley in this building that he set up at 391 San Antonio Drive, right on the border of Mountain View and Palo Alto. Started out life as a packing shed for apricots picked in the orchards of the area. Shockley used it as his lab where they developed quite a number of new technologies that we will learn about later on. The lab itself went out of business about 10 years later for reasons we'll discuss in a moment. I went through a number of lives. When I arrived in the area in 1968, it was a stereo store. Anyone remember quadraphonic sound? So I had my first demonstration there. Later became, for many years, almost sort of back to the apricot days as a packing shed when it was the Fiesta supermarket and then a produce market. And today, of course, that was all swept away and has been replaced by a very large complex of theaters and offices. At least the developers did recognize the importance of what was happened in that little shed and invested some money in some interesting sculptures and other structures that on the site. Shockley might have been brilliant. Moore said he's the only man I knew that could see electrons, but alienated the young men who worked for him. They first tried to get Beckman to replace Shockley as leader. Beckman said, I'm going to replace the Nobel Prize with a bunch of young kids. You got to be kidding. And so eventually they spun out, found money from Sherman Fairchild on the East Coast and set up themselves at this building, which still exists at 844 Charleston, and invented some very important technologies while they were there. There is a California Registered Historical Landmark plaque number 1000. It's an interesting number, celebrating the fact that the first commercially practical integrated circuit was created here. And the success of that really came about from three important figures. Jean Henny, a brilliant Swiss chemist and physicist, developed a process called the planar process that allowed manufacturing of semiconductors to be done using photolithography and turned it into a high volume business rather than the handcrafting process that was used prior. Bob Noyce, his boss's key realization was what Herney had created allowed you not just to make a whole bunch of transistors on a chip, but to integrate, to hook them all together with metal leads and turn it into a microelectronic circuit. And the third contributor to the success of this was Gordon Moore, who was R&D director at Fairchild, who recognized after a few years that everything that people were doing, smarter engineering, better lithography, improved process technology, was allowing the number of transistors to be put onto chip to almost double every year for about 5 years. And he published this in a paper back in 1965. And that was read by many people throughout the world and became a self-fulfilling prophecy when engineering managers would look at their guys and say, well, Fairchild's doubling their chips every year. Why can't you do that? And so that continued for decades and decades, right up until 2010, where you can see we've gone from a few hundred transistors on a chip to a billion transistors on a chip. Slowing down a little bit today, but Moore's law is still alive and still creating the drive that brings new products and new inventions to fore. Fairchild being so successful, but down there on in their first building, realized they needed to expand, and they built their first building on the complex of the East Whisman area, that quadrant between Whisman and Ellis and 101 and Middlefield there. First building that went up was 545 Whisman Road, was a big manufacturing and production building. The second building on the site, 313 Fairchild Drive, is the headquarters building. Possibly the third, I'm not sure the sequence here, was a mask making shop that existed there right in the middle of the complex. The fourth building that came along, not a Fairchild building, it was Fairchild's first spin out, a company called Ream Semiconductor. Ream was a Midwest manufacturing company, and a gentleman by the name of Ed Baldwin, who was general manager of Fairchild, had brought in as adult supervision, if you like, over the 8 founders, realized that semiconductors had a great future, and he wanted a bigger piece of the action, and found his own money at Ream, set up a company right next door to Fairchild. However, he made one fatal mistake. He left about a month too early. It was a month before Jean-Denis demonstrated the planar process, which was the secret to Fairchild's ongoing success. Beyond the Ream building, building number 5 was the Hi-Rel building, where chips were specially assembled and tested for use in aerospace and military applications, notably the chips used in the Apollo moon landing. The prototypes were all manufactured in this building. And number 6, I'm not quite sure what that was. I think it was 515 Whisman was the address. That was the first building I moved into when I moved into the area to work for Fairchild in 1968. We called it the American Standard Building. I'm not quite sure what was behind that. 2 other critical buildings to the success of Fairchild here, of course, was, one more, 464 Ellis Street, which was finally the big headquarters building right through till Fairchild disappeared from the scene. And then the 2 other important buildings, Chubby's Broiler up on the corner, was a very popular hamburger bar, and far more significantly, Wilder on the corner of Whisman and Middlefield there. We have Walker's Wagon Wheel that we'll visit in a second. So here are some photos from the early days of those buildings. This was the first manufacturing building. This went up in 1958, and that was the headquarters for a while. Big opening ceremony here. I managed to figure out who the folks were in this photograph just the other day. The 3 members of the senior Fairchild Camera and Instrument Corporation from the East Coast. And one of the gentlemen there was Charles Morse, who apparently was vice president of Ferry Morse Seeds. So I'm assuming that this property was at one time Ferry Morse property. In that building on Whisman Road, the Fairchild founders posed for this photograph back about 1961, I think it was, in the lobby with the Flying F logo in the background. This is a photograph you've seen reproduced many, many times in terms of stories of the early days of Silicon Valley. Taken by a photographer, Wayne Miller, who I think was working for Fortune or one of the business magazines at the time. And he shot quite a number of scenes because we see the guys in the same clothes, Bob Noyce still wearing the same tie, out on the patio in front of the cafeteria. And then once more, again, crowded around Noyce in the, it looks like a test area at Whisman Road back in that time of that photograph. Again, 1961, I believe it was dated. A couple of other photographs to give you a sense of what it looked like inside of the building. This was an advanced wafer diffusion furnace. Bob, I'm sure you will recognize, Robert, I'm sure you recognize what this must have been. And notice no smocks, no headgear, no protective gear, and at least they wore an apron to keep the nasty hydrofluoric acids off their clothes. This is, I believe, looks like an assembly area where the workers are using microscopes and bonding equipment to attach tiny wires to the semiconductor chips. And this looks like a test area where each of the semiconductor devices is being tested on some electronic equipment to make sure it meets required characteristics before shipment to the customer. This is what that Ream building looked like, right next door to what later became 464 Ellis Street. And I told you the story about Ed Baldwin and moving too early. This was the Fairchild headquarters at 313 Fairchild Drive. As described here, it was a modern $2 million building dedicated in late 1963. And it's incredible how fast we forget something this important. I could not find a single picture of this on the web anywhere. And I just cannot believe that the city of Mountain View allowed them to knock down this monumental 1950 style mid-century modern manufacturing facility. I think the only worst case of knocking down something important was IBM's Building 35 in South Santa Fe, the first modern high-tech campus. So I do have a personal memento of 313 Fairchild Drive. This is my offer letter to join Fairchild back in 1968. I was living in Scotland at the time. I'll be reporting directly to Mr. Bell Welling and a starting salary of $875 US a month. That's $10,000 a year. Doesn't sound much today, but I quickly figure out it was more than the Prime Minister of England was making at the time. So I was pretty happy. And if you can see kind of bleeding through the back of that sheet, I've forgotten all about what was on the back. But it turns out that when I walked into Bill Welling's office on the Monday morning after started there, and it kind of shows you how relaxed and how easygoing it was in those days. Bill looked at me and he said, I want you to get out of here. And I don't want you back until you've done three things. You've got to find yourself an apartment, buy yourself a car, and find yourself a girlfriend. And I did accomplish all that in a week. That's pretty good. And what is on the back of the sheet are the prices of the convertible Mustangs that I was looking at during that week. And in those days, you could get a 1966 convertible Mustang in great condition for $1,775. My, how times have changed. This is one of my business cards from that time. This is the time where folks had spun out to start many new companies. Notably, Noyce and Moore had spun out to start Intel, and there was a constant churn over of people, which frankly had been a great opportunity for young people. I think I had about 5 positions in 5 years. It was a great experience for later times in the Valley. The building I spent most time in was this at 464 Ellis Street. That was the final corporate headquarters, opened in 1968. Fascinating building, sort of exterior steel skeleton holding it up. It rusted to a deep, rich brown color commonly known as the Rusty Bucket. And this was the headquarters of Fairchild until the demise of the company several years later. Just around the corner, on the corner of Middlefield and Whisman, was the company cafeteria, Walker's Wagon Wheel. Interesting place where people would meet after hours, celebrate successes, commiserate on failures. But it had a very interesting feature just over on the top. It was over on the top of the corner there behind the Shell gas station. A Conestoga wagon carefully balanced, precariously balanced on the roof would be a better description of it. And I don't know if my friend Jerry Hadley is listening in today. She said she'd try to. Jerry is now married to Ron Cote. Ron Cote at that time was an assistant attorney in the City of Mountain View's offices. And Ron decided that they were an earthquake hazard and had to be removed. I don't think Jerry's ever forgiven Ron for that decision. But Jerry, it's Valentine's Day. Forgive him for a day at least. Inside the wagon wheel was very crowded, lots going on, secrets being shared, processes being discussed. Quite a number of observers have looked and said that this kind of meeting that was very frequent on the West Coast is one of the important reasons why semiconductor technology moved so quickly here in Silicon Valley versus on the East Coast, because everyone was located together, ideas were discussed and built on and swapped quickly and moved along. On the left-hand side is the bar, and that bar is almost quite famous. We'll look at it a little later on. Some of observers have said that so many secrets were being exchanged here that the KGB officer sat at one end of the bar and the FBI officer sat at the other end of the bar, keeping his eye on him to make sure that nothing untoward was going on. And this is the place where Don Heffler's idea for Silicon Valley sort of matured in his mind, even though he actually heard the word Silicon Valley at a luncheon up in San Francisco. Somebody kind of just casually as Silicon Valley. And he was searching for a title for the article that he was going to write at that time on a history of the Valley until that time. And 3 weeks later, it appeared, Silicon Valley, USA, the first use of that nickname in print that we know of back in 1971, 50 years ago last month. And Heffler left Electronic News and started up his own muckraky magazine. He'd loved titles like this one, I'll tell you, Hanky Panky at Nippon Electronic. He would report on all the goings on, all the secrets, and had a coterie of people who would let him know. And his obituary described him as being liked by some, disliked by many, and read by all. And this is a good example over on the right-hand side. Heffler had a strong, felt good about Noyce and the role that he played in the development of Fairchild, but was not nearly so happy about the people that followed, particularly who followed Noyce, Les Hogan, and notably had his daggers out forever, Wolf Corrigan's running of the company. The wagon wheel disappeared, sadly, in 2003. I guess it was considered a hazard even without the Conestoga wagons on the roof. And although the Computer History magazine was lucky enough to get a few pieces, here we have some of the wagon wheels that were used internally. I love the white glove handling of them as they're taken into the archives. And one of those wheels is on display in the Revolution exhibit. And on the lower piece, the bright yellow slab of wood, is a section of the bar that a friend of mine, Tom Branch, saw the place being torn down, ran home, got some tools, cut this piece out of the bar, took it home with him, ended up in Florida, and I tracked him down, and he donated that as another exhibit in the semiconductor part of the Computer History Museum. Fairchild, of course, was incredibly important. One of Heffler's contributions was the creation of this genealogy chart of Fairchild. And he showed here that from 1957, where Fairchild was founded, 120 semiconductor companies spun out over that period of time. Many other companies, of course, mass making shops, equipment manufacturers, media companies, all based on the success of Fairchild, but no company succeeded quite to the extent of this little company here that was founded in 1968, Intel Corporation. And Intel itself started in that block on Whisman. This is their first building, 365 East Middlefield Road. A later, this, I think this was possibly a very early anniversary. The chip on the right is their famous first product that brought the company notice, a dynamic random access memory chip that basically introduced the concept of solid state memory to computers. But the Japanese quickly caught up on manufacturing jelly beans like that. And Intel, 10 years later, basically dropped out of the mainstream memory business and placed a bet, incredibly successful bet, on the success of their first microprogrammable computer on a chip, the 4004 CPU for the first microprocessor chipset. This is what that chip was like. It was first samples were built in that building on Middlefield. 4004 CPU, introduced in 1971, had a huge 2,300 transistors on it, and a monumental achievement for those days. 2011, I have another example of an Intel chip, one of the Itaniums. Following Moore's law, by that time, they were putting 3 billion transistors on a chip. And that was 10 years ago. That's old hat. If you buy a high performance graphics chip from something like NVIDIA or AMD today, you'll get 20 to 30 billion for your money. And so that's much of this history is collected, although of course the Computer History Museum consists of a lot more important things than just hardware and just Silicon Valley. But if you'd like to see some of the kinds of things that came out of all these activities, Fairchild and other companies, there's a lot of them on display. The Hewlett-Packard 35, the iPhone, Cisco, high-speed storage, and of course, word processors and personal computers. So that's my story. I started getting interest in this activity about 1999 after reading this book by David Kaplan, where he said Silicon Valley doesn't care much for its history, high-tech or otherwise. It should. So I've collected a lot of information and put a lot of time into the Computer History Museum in this area. And so I'm going to leave a little bit of homework for the folks at the Mountain View Historical Association. I think it's high time this small corner of Mountain View be recognized as an important national landmark. It should be on the Register of Historical Landmarks, and it should certainly be on the Register of California Historical Landmarks. And I'd hope that with some effort, you can put together an application and maybe with a little help from Google or Intel or somebody, come up with some money and put up one of those nice historical plaques on the corner at 313 Fairchild Drive, where it belongs. So thank you, Fairchild. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for a wonderful career that I enjoyed. And I'll leave you with this version of the Fairchild logo, very appropriate for Valentine's Day, created by Larry Bender to celebrate the 50th anniversary that we all enjoyed. And I can't believe that even that was 2007. My, how time flies. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was very informative. Wow. I guess our big task ahead.
There you go.
That's great. Thank you so much, David. David. So in any case, our next segment will be presented by Nikki Lowy and Brooke Ray Smith. And if we can get their faces to appear. So now we're going to be talking about the future of East Whisman. And then at the end, we'll take some questions. There's a couple of questions that I have that have been posted here, and we want to make sure we have a chance to cover some of those. So in any case, so the two women who will be helping us next are the community engagement managers for Google's East Whisman and North Bayshore projects. We'll be just focusing on the East Whisman today. Nikki has a background in partnership development, working at the intersection of real estate and education. Prior to joining Google, she worked for local school districts to help educators buy homes and build financial security. Brooke Ray is with Lendlease, Google's real estate development partner, helping Google fulfill its regional 1 billion, that's billion with a B, housing commitment to build 20,000 new homes across the Bay Area. Brooke Ray has a background in public placemaking and community engagement, having led nonprofits focused on creating and improving parks and public spaces in San Francisco. And prior to that, working with Creative Investment Group focused on making downtown Los Altos most vibrant. And Brooke Ray actually knows Nick from graduate school, so she's not a stranger. So ladies, take it away.
Great, thanks so much, Pamela, and thank you, David. It's a tough act to follow, but excited to share a bit with you about the East Whisman of today and the future. So as Brooke Ray's pulling up our presentation, we just have a few slides in the next 10-15 minutes to walk through on our Middlefield Park Master Plan, which is referring to the 40 acres of land that Google owns in the East Whisman neighborhood. And then I guess if we go to the next slide, just to back up a little bit, Brooke Ray is from Lendlease, I am from Google, and just a little bit of history. So as many folks probably know, Google's history in Mountain View began with, started with Google leasing buildings, and then that led to Google starting to buy land and build its own office buildings. And then the next evolution of that, which this master plan is kind of the first foray into, is really Google, beginning to look at, building complete neighborhoods, including jobs and housing and a mix of uses all together. And to accomplish that, we really needed to bring in an expert that had experience in doing this across the world, across the globe, and conducted an extensive search and ultimately, brought on Lendlease, who, because of our shared values, because of their global expertise in building thriving communities around the world, was really a great match. And so we're just excited to be here delivering on the vision of the East Whisman Precise Plan, and excited to progress this master plan together. So I think I'm going to hand things back to Brooke Ray, also known as BR, if in case you hear me refer to Brooke Ray as BR, to just give a little context to ground us on where we're talking, and then we'll walk through some highlights and details of the master plan.
Great, thank you, Nikki. All right, so let's look at the area. You all are probably quite familiar with this at this point, but we have Highway 101, 237, and 85, which really form an interesting kind of triangle out here, which consists of, we've got Wagon Wheel in North Whisman, South Whisman, Slater, a number of different sub neighborhoods. But East Whisman, then the city of Mountain View spent a number of years, I think a full solid 3 years, 2016 to 2019, creating, they called a precise plan, so a vision for the East Whisman area that was released in late 2019, and identifies a mixed use vision for this neighborhood. What you see, so the precise plan boundary is shown in orange here. And then in the gray hatch is then our Middlefield Park master plan area. We call it Middlefield Park as sort of maybe the name will stick, maybe it's just a placeholder name, but it's also the name of the VTA station that this plan is centered around. So the VTA station obviously comes from Castro and then through Whisman and then up to Middlefield before heading to NASA and Moffett Field. If we zoom in a little bit just on what does East Whisman look like today, again, the orange boundary is the precise plan boundary, which is the name for the city's vision plan. Most of what the land area is today, no surprise to most of you, I'm sure, but surface parking lots, low density office, the VTA light rail going right through the middle, and not a whole lot of activity unless you work in one of these buildings. The precise plan identifies that the area right around the VTA Middlefield station should have what's called a mixed use character, which means the city envisions a vibrant mix of a lot of different types of uses all in one area. So you have housing and office and retail and parks all centered around transit line, which is just really good urban planning policy in any case, and a wonderful thing to see here. So it's a really, I spent a few minutes focusing on the precise plan because it's a fantastic blueprint, and really was the guide and still is the guide for Google and Lendlease's vision for the area as well. We are implementing this precise plan vision because it's a great vision. So I'll turn it back over to Nikki now to share some of the highlights of what our plan looks like.
Great, thanks, VR. Great, so I'll just kind of walk them through just a couple key features of this plan. So, I'd say first in above all, is really fulfilling the vision of the precise plan as a complete mixed-use neighborhood that combines, housing and jobs and park space, and achieving that balance all within a short walk to that VTA station. So really focus on transit-oriented developments and a mix of activities around transportation. Kind of on the next level down, if we go to the next slide, we really saw this as a housing forward plan. So this, we are proposing as part of the master plan proposal between 1675 and 1900 new homes for this project, 20% of which are targeted to be affordable. And that's, we're achieving that by dedicating land to the city. So to have where the city can run a process to bring in an affordable housing developer to build that affordable housing. In addition to housing, another big focus of this plan is the parks and open space. As part of the proposal, we're proposing 12 acres of open space as part of this project. 8 acres is going to be land that Google owns today that we're dedicating permanently to the city. An additional 4 acres of the remainder of that 12 is going to be privately owned, but publicly accessible open space. So some great opportunities that BR will show us in a bit of plazas and different walkways that's open to the public. This open space and along with just the land use decisions around is key to that is also mobility and connectivity is another big feature of the plan, and that's looking at not only providing connectivity within the site and making it safe and easy to move throughout the site through smaller block sizes and over 3 miles of new walking and bicycle trails, but also providing some of those much needed connections through some of the other great trail and bike networks throughout the city. And then of course, every spot in the project is within a 10-minute walk to the VTA station. And then all these things that kind of mobility and land use decision feed into a broader sustainability story. And that is on not only kind of moving from this car-centric suburban office park to providing opportunities for people to get out of their cars and walk to the local coffee shop in this new project, or hop on the VTA to go downtown, but also in some of the decisions we've made around prioritizing native plant species, all new buildings, both office and residential, having very ambitious sustainability and green standards, and then small decisions, including putting solar voltaics on every building and having electric vehicle charging stations in all the buildings as well. And then finally, the last feature we are excited to highlight is something we're both particularly passionate about, is just the opportunity for community, for gathering spaces, for places for people to come together, for some of the retail and community spaces that we've heard from the community is needed and desired in this area. And we're really providing, I'd say, the building blocks in order to accomplish some of these ideas by providing 50,000 square feet of retail and community space. So that could allow for uses such as a grocery market, a nonprofit gathering space, a satellite library, for example. And as we'll share more in a bit, Brooke Ray and I have spent a lot of the fall talking with community members and different neighborhood groups about just some of the great ideas that could really bring this space to life. So we started at kind of a high level. I'm going to hand things back to Brooke Ray to talk about some of the details of the plan.
Great, thank you, Nikki. All right, so zooming in, we're going to show sort of the land use plan, but starting with another aerial vision here. This is showing kind of what the area looks like today. In red is our master plan boundary. What's notable here is that over half of the site is surface parking lot. That even excludes the roads that run through this site, but that's a lot of surface parking. And then obviously another 40% office. There's very, very little green space there today. Our plan is proposing to convert almost 40% of the site into green space, and another quarter of the site almost into residential. So new homes for people in the area. That's really important. This is also an office project as part of the precise plan. So one aspect of the precise plan is it calls for a jobs housing balance. So if with the thought that we want to link people being able to live near where they work and vice versa. So in yellow here are the residential buildings. There are 6 of them. The red at the edges connotes that the ground floor would have active retail or active uses. That could mean shops, restaurants, as Nikki mentioned, a grocery. It could be active front stoops, so front porches in more of these quieter residential buildings. But you'll notice all of this active use fronts along public open spaces. So we'll spend a decent amount of time in this presentation kind of walking you through the site by the linkages of these different new public spaces. So this is the largest park. It's a 6-acre park that will be dedicated fully to the city. So it's Google's land right now. It will become the city's land. Let's see what else. So the office buildings, also worth noting at this master planning stage, this is a master plan is really kind of just the horizontal building blocks of where different uses go. These buildings will not be giant cubes. These are just the placeholder footprints for where the building would end up being designed within during later phases of the process, if and when the city does approve this master plan. We're pointing out here the VTA line runs right through the middle. We have 2 parking structures. You note they're purposely tucked at the very far end of the site. We really want this site to be, and the whole master plan to be as walkable as possible. So cars can drive up Clyde and park up here, mostly for the office, exploring possible shared use with the park. The residential buildings will have underground parking beneath the building itself, so they'll be integrated as well. So you'll notice there's really very little, if no, surface parking anywhere in this plan. Okay, so now let's walk through the parks. I think that's a nice way to visualize and kind of get us out of the bird's eye top-down view and into the site itself. So everything you see here in green are part of the 12+ acres of new open space. Light green are called POPAs, or privately owned, publicly accessible spaces. So they'll maintain Google ownership, but be publicly accessible. And it means that Google Lendlease are on the hook for maintaining those spaces. So it keeps that off of the city's books to need to maintain those spaces. All of these other spaces are dedicated to the city as part of the precise plan requirements. And let's start then with a little walkthrough. Imagine you've just gotten off the VTA light rail station. So at Middlefield here, you've seen this diagram before, but it's just an illustrative rendering, very preliminary. I'd say focus less on the architecture, but more, this is helpful to give you a sense of scale of how big this plaza will be. It's a 1-acre plaza. So there could be a grocery store, cafes, outdoor seating, some sort of art feature is something that we're very excited about. Could be a water feature. Again, this is part of what we're very interested in hearing community feedback about. As we move north, so that was Ellis Plaza right there at the VTA station. As we move north along Ellis Walk or Ellis Park, this is a long linear right-of-way with ample space on either side for kiosks and community activities. So this is where we could have, we've been hearing a lot of interest in pickleball courts, playgrounds, rentable spaces for birthday parties or small neighborhood gatherings in a post-pandemic world, of course. On the left, you see sort of probably spilling out of some of these buildings would be outdoor dining. This is all a bike ped only right of way, so no cars other than emergency vehicle access. And you travel up along Ellis Walk to get to a bridge, which is important for the site plan. Let me just zoom back here and show the city's precise plan calls for a non-at-grade crossing of the VTA line. If you're familiar with this area, the only real places to cross now are out on Middlefield itself, or then pretty up towards Highway 101. So this would create a very important new crossing of the VTA line. The city will build it. It's not something that Google Lendlease would be building on our own because we're not a public agency. We can't build over a public utility line, but we'll be putting the footprint in to create the pads for this bridge. So if you were to go up and over the bridge, what you would see is you would look east into the new Mod Park. We call it Mod Park, standing back here. So pretend you're standing on top of this bridge looking east. Mod Park is the new 6-acre park. It is called for in the precise plan, so named because of Mod Avenue close by. This is again an artistic rendering, just mostly to give you a sense of the scale. Important to note, this is going to be a public park, and the land will be dedicated to the city. So the city of Mountain View will be the ones to undergo a community engagement process and design process for this park. We had our landscape architects put together some ideas of what could go in this park to show you a sense of the scale. So it is big enough. There could be a community pool with a community center associated with it. There could be a playing field. There could be a large nature play area. Obviously lots of walking and biking trails. And then what we'll be doing is making sure that there's residential. This is looking at the south side along Maud Avenue with ground floor active uses to make it exciting and inviting, give really good eyes on the street so this park is clean, safe, and welcoming for everybody. Okay, now we'd love to hear some of your questions and ideas, particularly about some of the community spaces, public spaces, retail, and what those of you who are on the call who are neighbors or in the Mountain View area, what you think. So next steps, let's see. Nikki, do you want to take this or do you want me to run through?
Sure, I can just take this quickly. So just I guess a quick note on where we're at with this plan. So we submitted the master plan to the city back in September, and then over the last couple of months of the fall was working very closely with city staff to kind of refine the master plan, answer questions, and then kind of a big focus of Brooke Ray and my work was bringing this to the community and starting to get some initial feedback and having a lot of great conversations, answering questions, getting some really wonderful initial ideas. And that led up to last week, 2 weeks ago, we had our first study session with the Environmental Planning Commission with EPC and had a great discussion. And then in the coming weeks are having our first study session with City Council. And then after that, looking ahead, we're excited to have more opportunities for community engagement. I think particularly having another series of public community meetings in the spring, summer, and then continuing to work with the city to refine the master plan, leading into kind of a final approval for the master plan, approval hearing, probably around sometime towards the end of this year, early 2022. And with that, I think just one more slide. Oh, if there are any questions, kind of remaining questions after today, we just wanted to flash up our contact information in addition to my email and Brooke Ray's email down there. Middlefieldpark@Google gets both of us, as well as our city staff lead, Lindsay Hagan, and then our website, as well as the city's website up there as well for more information and updates about upcoming engagement opportunities or articles, etc. And I think with that, we can hand things back to Pamela and Nick for Q&A.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting. It's exciting to see something being developed differently from what we're used to seeing, which is office parks with lots of big parking lots. So it's really exciting to see something be developed from the ground up. Thank you again, ladies. So we do have time for Q&A, and actually we're probably going to go a little bit longer. But first, Nick has a survey that he would like us to participate in. So Nick, do you want to fire that up?
Yeah, just really quickly, we're just going to launch a very simple poll. We want to hear where folks are tuning in from, whether it's Mountain View, outside the Bay Area, outside the country. So if you, all optional, if you'd like to fill out this poll, I'm just about to launch, and then we'll have another question about your connection to Mountain View. So in addition to you asking our panelists questions, we just had a couple questions for you, all optional though. So here we go. And we can fill that out as we start to take questions. So I don't know, Pamela, if you wanted to run the Q&A, but I was jotting down some of the questions that have come up over both
Yeah,
presentations.
I jotted down what I thought were probably questions that would interest most of the people here.
Great.
So let's finish with your.
We can just let that run while we're starting to answer some of the questions.
Great. Okay, so there was a couple of questions that we'll direct to David Laws. One was, what happened to Fairchild? What was the cause of the demise of the company?
I should give you 10 years worth of Don Heffer's newsletters and you'd get the whole story. It was a time where many semiconductors were trying to find ways to improve their margins. And instead of focusing on what they did well, which was building chips, they tried to get out into building systems. There was the big electronics boom for watches and calculators, PCs, big computers. And none of them were very successful this. It took a total different management style, different financing style to be successful in those business. So a lot of companies fell beside the way. Fairchild lost a lot of energy that they could have put into that direction by trying to go in those directions. And eventually they continued to grow, continued to expand, substantially bigger after a decade of management by Hogan and Corrigan, but not making the kind of profits that Fairchild were used to. And eventually they were bought out by Schlumberger, the oil electronics company. Schlumberger struggled with it, totally misunderstanding the business for another 10 years. And it was eventually bought out by one of Fairchild's spinouts, National Semiconductor bought Fairchild. And just a few years ago, National was swallowed by Texas Instruments. So a long, complicated story, but a matter of taking our eyes off the ball, trying to do other things, and lost their way.
Not an uncommon story. One question that we got was addressing gender imbalance. And actually, I think back in those days, actually more women were getting degrees in computer science than is happening now, if I'm correct. So was there a reason that these smart women were not invited to the table?
Well, what they needed were chemists, physicists, metallurgists, almost structural engineers. Women weren't pursuing those fields. And there were areas where women were predominant, obviously in the labor area, but two areas where women without these technical qualifications were able to make very important contributions were mask design. Mask designers were almost predominantly women and did a very important job, and many held senior positions in the company as a result. The other area where women were very strong was in communications. Lots of women in PR, communications, and presenting the story to the world. But if you couldn't come in with a strong degree and get right down to a bench and start working the next day on using a scanning electron microscope, you just didn't hire those kinds of people.
Okay, great, thank you. And actually there was a question regarding Mr. Shockley. I think we've all heard that he was really a booger to work for. So can you address some of the dark side of?
Yeah, Shockley was a brilliant man. but everything had to be his idea. Everything had to be done his way. And he was a micromanager, which is why when he left Bell Labs, why he wasn't promoted to higher levels within Bell Labs, he wasn't perceived as being able to manage large groups from that perspective. He tried to hire a whole bunch of his peers from Bell Labs to come west. There was no way they were going to work for Shockley. But by now he was recognized as the inventor of the transistor, and he was able to hire a bunch of brilliant young men who had heard it. Noyce, Moore, Jay Last, Jean Haney came into his company. But again, he lost focus on the original reason he hired them. He came up with another idea. In fact, it was a precursor to the integrated circuit, but was totally impractical to build at the time. And yet the young men who worked for him all realized there was a huge opportunity in just taking silicon and making transistors out of it. And that's when they spun out to form their own company. His company never made a profit. He got heavily involved from a scientific perspective on eugenics. And his approach, I think, was hoping, if I can understand eugenics, maybe I can help people who aren't so fortunate. Unfortunately, his style was so unpleasant and so in your face that he was persona non grata at Stanford. So he was one of the most brilliant men in the world, brought this incredible technology to Silicon Valley, and basically died in ignominy.
Yeah, you kind of wonder about brilliant people who are like that. If he would have been, how would you say it, a much more accommodating or a different personality, would all these companies have spun off? You kind of wonder.
They probably would not have spun off, but he probably would not have been able to do what he was able to do in the first place.
Yeah, it's interesting how the future would have been different if he would have been a different kind of personality.
Or even if his mother hadn't lived in Palo Alto, we wouldn't be here today.
Probably so. Okay. We've had a couple questions about the Superfund status, and David's really not equipped to talk about that, nor am I. Robert, do you have any comments about some of the pollution plumes that are floating around, or maybe Nikki or Brooke Ray might have something to address on that?
Probably our Google people would be the ones who would be most knowledgeable of the situation. No?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that because, you know, Lendlease, we're doing a lot of the sort of due diligence and researching the sites. We know so there is a Superfund, it's called the MEW plume. The EPA has been cleaning it up for a number of decades now. It does not there are no plumes or anything of concern that run through our master plan site. There are areas that they call them plumes because, you know, there's the sort of impetus site, and then things are the chemicals are drifting downstream, so northward towards the bay. The MEW plume runs just to the east, to the west of our site, and Lendlease, you know, we have worked on a number of different kinds of sites all over the world. We do a lot of partnership with the U.S. military, and so we're quite aware of how this all works. And the way that we would move forward is we just respond to whatever the regulatory agencies tell us in terms of what sort of mitigation is required. So for example, if we're deciding to put underground parking on our site, we'll just need to take standard precautions. There's nothing that's unusual in this case, but just to make sure that the groundwater doesn't, we don't invite the flow our direction. That's the main area of concern. And again, it flows to the west of our site, but we are working with all the agencies and will be as we move forward with these building plans. They're pretty standard ways that you need to add extra ventilation, particularly if there's any habitable spaces, to make sure that any off-gassing can go straight up and doesn't get accumulating in buildings.
Great.
Yeah, a little commentary on that, Pam. One of those consequences of unintended consequences of decisions that are made in the past. All those tanks, when the companies came in, they were originally built above ground. The fire departments came in and said, you can't have those above ground. they're fire hazards and they're dangerous. You've got to bury them in the ground. So the tanks were all buried underground and nobody knew when they were leaking. Now we're smart enough to put them in concrete vaults, so, and have ways of knowing when the things leaked. But that was sad.
Yeah, unintended consequences. This question is for the two ladies. Are there any opportunities for ownership? In other words, are some of the buildings going to be built as condos for sale, or are they going to be, or even made in such a way that they could be changed over to condominiums at a later date for ownership?
It's a great question. And Beer, do you want to take that one too, as the residential developer?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. And I appreciate the question. Worth a little preface in that, so Lendlease, as part of our partnership, we are working with Google to help Google get its entitlements on its land and figure out this wonderful mixed use plan and new housing that it's going to be building. Once the building actually begins, Lendlease would be kind of the primary builder and operator of the homes, and then the ground floor shops and community spaces as well. So we are starting that residential planning now. Right now, based on sort of market uncertainties, and I mean, there's a lot going on. We're planning on the up to 1,900 units being rental for now, but we absolutely would love to be able to go a condo direction. So yes, they would be convertible. I think an interesting challenge that from the Lendlease perspective is, we're creating a place that hasn't been a place yet. So for someone to, take a leap and want to be an owner in a new area that, has pretty much been mostly office park land with not a lot of amenity, not much open space, not a lot of, great retail opportunities within walking distance, we might not see a lot of bites from for condo sales in that very first phase. So we may do rental for the first few phases. The project will get built out in 4 primary phases over the next number of years. And so towards the end, maybe we'd be starting able to see some condos. But to the other part of your question as well, if I'm looking at Alex's question, we're envisioning a whole mix of all different demographics and ages in these housing units. So studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms. And we definitely want to have, an adequate balance of up to 3 bedrooms so that we can have families. We're very aware a lot of families that move to this area are working in tech, not necessarily Google, but they bring their whole family here. And so it's not just single, 20, 30 somethings. There's also the size demographic of sort of the millennials or tech workers also overlaps with seniors. So having smaller units that are accessible to transit and walkable for seniors is also quite important. I think the last thing I'll say about that is just the affordable housing piece as well is so important. It is very much part of our mix of what we're thinking about. And we're very excited to be able to partner with the city of Mountain View because the city will be the ones to build out the affordable housing. But when a city does it and works with an affordable housing developer, they can really target certain demographics that are the most needed, whether it's veterans or seniors or working families. And so we're in discussion currently, and we'll be working through that with the city.
Okay, great.
I could jump in really quick. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share the poll results just so everyone knows. We had about a little over 50 people tune in, up to 60 at one point. We have 21 from Mountain View, 15 from a different Bay Area city, 3 from somewhere outside the Bay Area in California, 2 from out of state, and 1 from somewhere in Asia. I had to put the continents in it, and I don't know if I'm going to put countries, but just a snapshot of who's in the room with us today since we can't all see each other's face. And while we answer these last remaining questions, I'll launch the second poll, which is about folks' connection to Mountain View.
Okay, great. That was primarily the question here's one that just came in. Will there be requirements for a person to be a Google employee to be able to live in one of the Lendlease apartment developments?
I can just answer that one quickly. No, so the future homes will be open to anyone. So we imagine that, they will be attractive to Googlers that want to work close to where they live, but equally attractive to anyone who lives, in and around the area to live there.
And I think that's also going to be true for North Bay Shore as well, that when that housing gets built, it's not going to be company housing.
Yep.
Good. Okay. So Robert, did you pick up any other questions that people might want us to have answered? Or is there anything that you want to have answered, since there was?
No. I
Somebody
typed my questions in and you asked them. So, and the other one seemed
I think
to be
there was
asked
something
already.
in the
So
chat.
there was a question about the light rail line, but I mean, I think that may be a misunderstanding in that the VTA, we're talking about an existing light rail line, right? There aren't, or is there going to be any kind of improvements to the VTA?
Yeah, and I saw that, just to clarify that line is operational, that stop is operational today. Kind of in addition to that, our transportation team, that is something that we've heard from a lot of neighbors and kind of asking about improvements to that line, and our transportation team is working with VTA to look into just opportunities to make that experience line more efficient.
I saw a different question from David Solinero asking, maybe Brooke Ray or Nikki or Robert knows more about this, but what's the vision for the intersection of Middlefield Road and Whisman, kind of just outside the East Whisman area, but historically maybe the center of that larger district, where the wagon wheel was.
So that corner in the precise plan is viewed as being a mini retail area. Robert and I both served on the planning commission when the East Whisman precise plan was being developed. Maybe Robert can also further.
Yes, I mean, the issue with that one is that that's what's currently in the precise plan. The owner has come several times to the planning commission, asking if he might be able to do, a more high density residential in that area. One of the concerns is that it backs up to a single family neighborhood. And so, I mean, it would have to be heard by the council to see whether there would be a zoning change. But another thing that's interesting is that if you go into the southwest corner where the Dollar Tree is now, I mean, this is actually part of the East Whisman precise plan as a retail center. And there are a number of interesting ideas there about like upgrading the retail in that area to either do a more dense retail or retail on the bottom with housing on top. So far, I haven't heard anything about specific plans for it, but when Pam and I were working on the East Whisman precise plan, I mean, that was a large part of the discussion, so that, in addition to what retail is being put up by Google and Lendlease in their area, that traditional area would be able to be upgraded and still provide some retail, and maybe even they even talked about housing opportunities and even townhomes on that area. So
Yeah, the precise plan recognizes that there needs to be retail if this is going to be a viable neighborhood, not just what Google wanted to put together, but if this is going to be a viable part of town, that we do need to have more shopping and a grocery store, preferably, or ideally in that area. I'm going to see what other questions we have. Somebody wants to know if this is being recorded. Yes, it is, and that was answered.
I have one more question. Can you talk about the time phase for all of this, and like how you're going to stage it in?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess kind of I'll start kind of big picture, and then we can talk about phasing. So big picture, I think as we mentioned, we're looking at going to that are here before City Council to approve the whole master plan would be sometime towards the end of this year or early 2022. If all kind of move, if the master plan were approved and everything moved along schedule, we could begin the first phase of construction, which is if you can remember from that master plan, it's the Ellis Plaza right by the VTA line, plus what we're calling R1 and R2. The first phase is residential, so that those kind of two residential buildings along with the Ellis Park by the VTA line, as well as dedicating what we're calling R6, which is the affordable housing parcel kind of at the right of your screen, east of the VTA line. That would be the first phase. So if the plan was approved, we could, let's say, turn the R6 over to right away. Construction could begin as early as 2023 on R1 and R2, and that would mean kind of buildings in the grounds by 2026. And then the subsequent phases, office would be the second phase, along with part of the office, and then kind of a third phase would be the remainder of the housing, and then the remainder of the office would be the final phase.
So how does the timing of this compare to the timing like with building in North Bayshore and also Google's plans in San Jose?
Yeah, you know, it's definitely a busy time when, you know, all three of these master plans, the Downtown West Plan in San Jose and North Bayshore, you know, are moving concurrently on different timelines. You know, all in all, you know, these are all plans that are kind of a 10 to 15 year build out, you know, over multiple phases. So, you know, there could be a scenario where planned kind of buildings are moving forward on all three areas at the same time in different phases, depending on kind of when those go before council and when they move along in their process.
So
And then don't
thank you
forget
for that.
about Google Bayview, which is outside the purview of anyone because it's on Moffett property. So that's a sort of an unknown as far as what's going to happen over there as well.
So
Okay.
Pamela, I'd like to patch in Jerry Hadley, who can talk a little bit more about her experience with the history of women in early Silicon Valley tech. I'm going to see if I can bring her to us. It's like a seance. And I think now, Jerry, you should be able to talk if you unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Hey, Jerry, good to see you.
Well, I joined Fairchild in 1965, and it was my first job after I graduated from college. And I went to work as a typist, actually, and soon became a secretary. And there were a couple of routes for women into better jobs, professional jobs. One was mask making, as David mentioned, and women excelled at that. And there were a lot of women doing that, mostly women in the 60s, late 60s. And another way was becoming a spec writer. And a good friend of mine, Ginger Tigrit Jenkins, encouraged me to become a spec writer, which I did. And that gave us the opportunity to take technical classes with the guys because semiconductor technology was so new, it wasn't even being taught in the universities. And so they had to teach it at Fairchild. So we had the option of attending those classes. And the other areas that opened up early were HR, which was known as personnel in those days, and women went into that. And as David mentioned, we also went into what was then known as marketing services, but it's now known as marketing communications and corporate communications. And typically women excelled at communicating and writing, and so we made great inroads there. Another area that started picking up for women in the late 70s, early 80s was in product marketing. And women started becoming product marketing engineers at several companies, at Fairchild, AMD, Intel, various companies. And also in sales, women turned out were very good at sales. So it was a minority in those positions of women, but it was still a place where we could make inroads. And I think for the most part, all of us were, we were just very dedicated, and we were patient. We persevered, and we were patient, and we just, we made it happen, along with support from, usually most of us had some support from mentors around the company, and that really helped. And in those days, all our mentors were men. But there were some that were, majorly helpful to me. John Duffy, Jack Boletto, Gordy Russell, a lot of the people in the bullpen, which is where almost everybody started out in marketing back when I joined the company in 1965. I mean, Mike Marcola was in the bullpen. I mean, amazing group of people at the company in those days. Anyway, that's my comment about women in the industry.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you. I had a friend who worked in HR in a company that will remain nameless, and she called it the women's ghetto. Anyway, which is probably not a socially appropriate thing to say, so I apologize. But she felt like she was pretty well constrained. Any case, do we have any other questions that we think should be addressed? We're sort of up against our extended time frame. So Nick, do you want to share the rest of the survey?
Sure. Let's see. I'll end this right now. You can all just see it. I'll just share the results. But most folks are living in Mountain View. Some, about 12, used to live in Mountain View. 7 currently work there. 9 used to work there. 8 used to live or work nearby, or used to live or work nearby. 5 more of those. And then no connection, just interested, is about 3 people. And I saw in the chat too, we have someone joining us from the UK who also wanted to thank David for his presentation on Fairchild.
Great, very interesting. Okay, all right, so I think we will bring this to a close. I want to thank our panelists for taking part of their day out, and thank you, Jerry, for chiming in on the women's perspective. We would like very much to have the people who are participating to join our organization, and maybe Nick can put up the website. You can either join through our website, and our next meeting that we will have, which will be Zoom again, unfortunately, will be the first Sunday in May. We haven't selected a topic yet, but we will find something of interest to everyone. And again, thank you for your support. And if there's no other questions from our panelists or comments from our panelists, Nick, do you want to say anything, or Robert?
Turn to Robert.
Nothing else for me. Just thank you all for attending. Had one of the best attendances ever. Probably it was part of the marketing of it, as if you really love Silicon Valley, show up today.
Great.
I am back. I have my connection back, so I'll just jump in and add, as Pamela said at the beginning, we are a small, completely volunteer-run nonprofit, so we appreciate you all joining us today, and any support you can have by joining us as members or donations, so we can continue to do free events like this for the people of Mountain View and the larger community. And just echoing Pamela and thanking our speakers for their time in this really fascinating talk. I love when we're able to connect the past with the future. So I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did.
Thanks for the opportunity. I enjoyed it.
Yes, visit the museum when it's open.
Do that.
Yeah, I guess you can go to the website. Thank you again, everyone. This was a fun afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you in May.
Take care, everybody.
Bye now.